They called me the girl who wiped down rifles, the one who kept the storeroom clean while the real warriors laughed and walked past me. In their eyes, I was invisible, a shadow in a room filled with steel and echoes of power. What they never saw was the truth buried beneath the quiet. These hands, the same hands they thought were meant only for dust and oil, once gripped a rifle on a night when everything fell apart, and with a single pull of the trigger, I reached across a distance so far the records refused to speak it. They never knew that the woman in front of them had carried a name whispered on battlefields, a name both feared and revered. They never knew I was once called the Valkyrie. I learned early that people see only what comforts them. A woman in uniform is either background noise or a novelty, rarely a threat. That judgment became my shield. I let them believe the story they wanted. Because silence is easier than confession, and sometimes secrets are all we have left. But a secret can burn like fire, and sooner or later it finds its way into the light. The truth is not pretty. It is not wrapped in parades or medals. It is written in the dust of forgotten roads and the blood of friends who never came home. I carry their faces in every breath I take, and I wonder if telling this story is my way of keeping them alive just a little longer. Before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if stories of courage and resilience speak to you. And share in the comments where you are listening from and what hour it is in your corner of the world. It is always moving to see how far these stories travel and whose hearts they reach. I kept my head low the way I had learned to do years ago. The storeroom smelled of oil and cold iron, the scent that clings to your skin until even your dreams carry the weight of steel. Each rifle was lined up like soldiers standing at attention, their barrels catching the fluorescent light, silent reminders of a discipline that never really leaves you. I wiped down the stock of the M2010 with a steady hand, knowing exactly how to move. How to let my breathing guide the rhythm. To anyone walking by, I was just the woman assigned to keep things tidy, invisible, replaceable, a ghost in fatigues that no longer fit the shape of the person I once was. It was safer that way. People like me who carried secrets wrapped in scars were better off hiding in plain sight. Yet there was always that sting, that prickle of shame that came when the younger men swaggered through the doors and looked right past me. They had no idea. Maybe that was for the best. The laughter came first, echoing down the corridor. I knew the sound well. It was the kind of laugh meant for an audience, too loud, too sharp, carrying the bravado of men who believed they owned the world. Commander Briggs entered first, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice to be heard. His reputation walked into a room before he did. Behind him trailed 4 younger SEAL, their boots scuffing the floor, their eyes quick to scan for weakness. Briggs stopped when he saw me bent over the workbench, his gaze fixed on the rifle in my hands. The M2010 glimmered under the fluorescent light, the long barrel stretching across the mat like a predator at rest. I had just finished reassembling it after a routine cleaning. My fingers still remembered every screw, every contour, every weight distribution. You do not forget these things, not if you once relied on them to survive. He smirked. Well, look at that. They got the janitor polishing precision rifles now. The words sliced through the room, casual enough to seem harmless, sharp enough to draw blood. The younger men chuckled, feeding off their commander's humor, glancing at me with that mix of amusement and dismissal. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, but I did not lift my eyes. My hand stayed steady on the cloth, moving across the steel like the words had never touched me. Silence can be its own kind of armor. I had learned long ago that answering mockery with anger only gave the enemy what they wanted. Better to let them believe I was small. Small things slip through cracks. Small things survive. One of the younger men leaned closer to Briggs, his voice just loud enough for me to catch. Bet she doesn't even know which end to look through. Another burst of laughter filled the room. I could have answered then. I could have told them I had sighted targets through scopes longer than some of them had been out of high school. I could have told them that the recoil of a rifle had once been the heartbeat that kept me alive. But I said nothing. Instead, I placed the rifle gently back into its rack, letting the click of the lock echo louder than their laughter. The storeroom fell into a brief hush. Even men who spend their lives in battle recognize a gesture of reverence when they see one. I touched the edge of the shelf as if sealing the memory away. The silence unsettled them, and quickly one of the younger SEAL broke it. "Come on, Commander, let's get to the range. No point wasting time in here." Briggs' eyes lingered on me a moment longer, curiosity flickering behind the mockery. Then he shrugged and turned away, the others following in his wake, still trading jokes. The sound of their boots faded, leaving me alone with the hum of the lights and the steady beat of my heart. Moments like that used to cut me open. Now they just reminded me of how far I had fallen and how far I had yet to climb inside my own mind. I leaned against the workbench, pressing the cloth into my palm until my knuckles whitened. There was a part of me that wanted to run after them, to prove in an instant that I was not what they thought. But proof is a dangerous craving. It drags the past into the present, and once it begins, it cannot be stopped. I closed my eyes and let the wave pass. The storeroom held me quiet and merciless, and I thought of the faces I carried, the voices silenced too soon. They deserved more than another confrontation, more than me wasting breath on the arrogant. I straightened my spine, returned the cloth to its drawer, and went back to work. That night the dream came again. Sand in my teeth, the sky burning red, the crack of rifles splitting the air. I woke with sweat cooling on my skin and the echo of a name in my ears. The Valkyrie. I hated it as much as I clung to it. A title carved out of loss, given by men who never lived to see the end of that day. To them, I was salvation. To me, I was just the one who lived while they died. The next morning, I walked across the base as the sun broke over the Atlantic. Norfolk bustled with the rhythm of duty, sailors in formation, officers barking orders, engines starting like thunder in the distance. I carried my coffee close, watching the young faces around me bright with ambition, untouched by the ghosts that haunted older eyes. No one looked twice at me. That was the way it had been for years, invisible, safe, but safety is fragile. And arrogance has a way of cracking it open. I saw Briggs again that afternoon. He stood outside the range with his team, laughter spilling into the air. When his gaze caught mine, his smirk returned, sharper than before. I knew then he had not forgotten the sight of me with the rifle. Curiosity was a seed, and he had planted it. It would grow. And so the first stone was set, not by me, but by the weight of their disbelief. Disbelief can be a powerful force. It builds walls and dares others to break them. What they did not know was that my life had been nothing but walls, and I had learned the art of breaking them down, one by one, until all that remained was the truth no one wanted to face. There is more to this story, and it will not be told in laughter. If you are still here, listening, stay with me. Because what begins as a joke in a weapons room will end with a revelation no one on that base ever expected to witness. The next days blurred into the routine I had carved out for myself. Inventory sheets, oil-stained rags, the careful rhythm of maintenance that kept me hidden in plain sight. I found comfort in the repetition. It dulled the edges of memory, kept the shadows at bay, yet I could feel the shift in the air whenever Briggs or his men were near. They no longer passed the storeroom without a second glance. Their laughter followed me like a shadow, sharper now, tinged with a challenge that had not been there before. On Thursday afternoon, the range echoed with gunfire, the sound rolling across the base like thunder. I was returning a crate of scopes when I heard the familiar drawl behind me. "Hey Ward, you ever fire one of these for real, or do you just keep them polished?" Briggs leaned against the doorway, arms folded across his chest, a predator waiting for movement. His team circled nearby, grinning, eager for a show. I set the crate down carefully, forcing my hands to stay calm. My job is to make sure they work when you need them. My voice was steady, flat, offering nothing more. One of the younger SEALs snorted. That's a no if I ever heard one. Briggs tilted his head, eyes narrowing as if he were peeling back layers I had worked hard to keep sealed. Funny thing is, you handle those rifles like someone who knows more than just cleaning. Got me curious. Curiosity. That word again, it is more dangerous than suspicion because it does not fade until it is satisfied. I felt the walls I had built start to tremble. "I do my job," I said, keeping my gaze fixed on the crate. "That's all that matters." But Briggs was not the kind of man to leave a bone untouched once he had tasted it. "Come on," he drawled, gesturing toward the range. "Show us what you got. One shot, that's all, or are you afraid you'll prove me right?" His voice was loud enough to draw attention. A few sailors paused in their tracks, curious. The pressure in the air thickened. My instincts screamed to walk away, to let the mockery pass, to remain the shadow I had become. Yet another voice whispered from the corners of memory, the voice of the fallen calling me a coward if I hid once more. The contradiction tore at me until I felt the weight of their eyes pressing like a blade against my back. I shook my head. Not today." My words were soft, final, but I saw the smirk spread across Briggs' face as if I had given him exactly what he wanted, cowardice in his eyes. The men laughed, their voices carrying across the yard. "Told you, all talk, no shot." Their jeers clung to me long after they walked away. I carried them into the night, into my dreams where the sand still burned and the rifles still sang. The following morning I found Briggs leaning against the rack of rifles when I entered. He lifted one with careless ease, spinning it as though it were a toy. "These weapons deserve respect," I said sharply, the first crack in my armor. His grin widened, sensing the spark. "So you do care," he said. "All this time I thought you were just background noise, but maybe there's more to you. Maybe you've been hiding something." He leaned close, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "And I'm going to find out." Something in his tone chilled me. This was no longer just mockery. It was a hunt. For days the tension thickened. His men whispered when I passed, their eyes sharp with curiosity. Briggs would linger near the storeroom, watching with that smirk that promised a storm. I told myself it did not matter, that I could weather it like I had weathered everything else. But I knew better. Men like him did not let go once their pride was hooked. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. The base was quieter than usual, the hum of the ocean louder than the shuffle of boots. I was cataloging magazines when the door burst open and Briggs stepped inside. His men trailing behind. He carried an M4A1 and set it down on the workbench in front of me. "Field, strip it," he ordered. No pretense, no humor, just command. I stared at him, my pulse thudding. To refuse would cement their judgment of me. To comply would begin a chain I could not stop. But there are moments in life where choice is an illusion, where silence is as damning as action. I wiped my palms on my fatigues, reached for the rifle, and let my fingers move. The world narrowed to metal and motion. Pin, bolt, carrier, spring. Each piece fell into place on the cloth like old friends returning home. My breath matched the rhythm, steady, unbroken. 4 minutes passed, maybe less. When I reassembled the weapon and set it upright, the room had gone silent. Briggs' grin faltered. The younger SEAL stared, their laughter swallowed by disbelief. One whispered, "No way." I locked the last piece into place. The click echoing like a gunshot. My hands rested on the weapon, calm, unshaken. I looked at Briggs then, meeting his gaze fully for the first time. Satisfied, for a long moment he said nothing. Then he barked a laugh, sharp and uneasy. "Beginner's luck. Anybody can learn to strip a rifle if they spend enough time in storage, but firing one, that's another story." The words were a lifeline for him, a way to dismiss what he had seen, but I caught the shift in his eyes. He knew this was no accident, and that knowledge was more dangerous than his mockery. As they left, their boots heavy on the floor, I felt the old weight settle on my chest. The first wall had cracked. The shadow was no longer enough to hide me. That night I sat by the window of my small quarters, the ocean breeze carrying salt and memory. I thought of the name they had once given me, the name I never asked for, the Valkyrie. I whispered it into the dark, a confession to no one. It tasted of ash and iron. The storm was coming. Briggs would not let it go. Curiosity had turned into obsession. And obsession always demanded proof. I knew where this path led, the range, the rifle, the truth clawing its way out of the shadows whether I wanted it or not. You may think this is just a game of pride, a clash of egos inside a base where men measure themselves by steel and bravado. But what waited on the other side of that challenge was more than a contest. It was the unearthing of a past I had buried beneath silence and loss, and once unearthed. The past has a way of consuming the present whole. Stay with me as we walk into that moment, because the day I stood on the range in front of Commander Briggs was the day the shadows could no longer hold my truth. The challenge came faster than I expected. It was a gray morning, the kind where the fog rolled in off the Atlantic and settled heavy over the base, muffling sound and softening edges. I was walking toward the Armory when I saw them gathered outside the range. Commander Briggs leaned against the wall, arms folded, his men restless beside him like a pack waiting for blood. When he spotted me, his grin spread wide, practiced, and cruel. "Ward," he called, his voice carrying across the lot. "You keep saying you know your way around weapons. Prove it." The men laughed, a low ripple that tightened my stomach. I hadn't said anything of the sort. I never boasted, never hinted. But Briggs was a man who shaped his own reality, and if the truth did not fit, he bent it until it broke. I kept walking, eyes forward, but he stepped into my path, holding out an M4A1. The the rifle gleamed under the weak light. Familiar and foreign all at once. My fingers twitched, memory tugging at them like a ghost. Field strip in the dark. His tone was final, daring. He motioned toward the storeroom where the lights had already been cut. His men cheered as though this were sport, not a test of dignity. For a heartbeat, I considered walking away. Pride is a heavy burden, but silence is heavier. If I refused, I would remain the butt of every joke the shadow mocked openly. If I accepted, I risked letting too much of myself slip through. My past had teeth, and once it bit into the present, it never let go. I took the rifle. The metal was cold, solid, familiar. The room closed in around me as I stepped inside, darkness swallowing everything. Only the faint crack of laughter outside reached me. My heart pounded, not from fear of failure, but from the flood of memory. I had done this before, countless times, under worse conditions. With sand grinding in my teeth and blood soaking the earth beneath me, my hands moved before thought could catch them. Pin, bolt, carrier, spring. The parts slid free in practiced order, each piece finding its place on the mat like a symphony I knew by heart. The darkness was no enemy, it was the ally I had once lived inside. My breath slowed, matched to the rhythm of disassembly. Minutes blurred, the world shrinking to metal and muscle memory. At last, the final piece clicked back into place. I set the rifle upright, the sound ringing clear in the dark. The stopwatch Briggs had set clicked off. 4 minutes and 10 seconds, came his voice, sharper now, stripped of humor. The door opened, light spilling in. I blinked against the brightness, the rifle steady in my hands. The men stared, their expressions frozen somewhere between disbelief and unease. The laughter had died, silence pressed thick as fog. One of them muttered, "No way she did that clean. Nobody does it that fast without training." Briggs' jaw tightened. He forced a laugh, brittle at the edges. Beginner's luck. Maybe she reads manuals in her free time. But his eyes betrayed him. He had seen precision that no manual could teach. I placed the rifle back on the rack, my hands steady. Satisfied, I asked, the words simple, stripped of pride or challenge. The younger men shifted, their bravado crumbling under the weight of what they had witnessed. Yet disbelief clung stubbornly. People cling to the stories that comfort them. And it comforted them to believe I was still the shadow they had mocked. Only one man did not look away. Master Chief Reynolds, older than the rest, with eyes that had seen more than they cared to remember. He studied me with a gaze that felt like it cut deeper than the rifle in my hands. When I turned to leave, he followed with his eyes, and in that quiet moment, I knew he had seen through me. That night I sat in my quarters, the ocean murmuring outside, and let the weight of it settle. The test had cracked the shell I lived inside. Curiosity had turned to suspicion, suspicion to recognition. The past pressed closer, threatening to spill free. I closed my eyes and remembered hands that had once clapped my shoulder after a successful mission, voices calling me by a name I had never asked for but could never shake. The Valkyrie. I thought I had buried her in the sand, but ghosts do not stay buried. They rise when least wanted. And they demand to be heard. If you are still here, listening, you already know that truth has a way of cutting deeper than mockery. And what began as a test in the dark would become a reckoning in the light. The silence after the test hung heavier than any insult they had thrown at me. Men who had swaggered into the room laughing now shifted uncomfortably, their bravado leaking out like air from a punctured tire. They wanted to look away but could not. I had given them no expression to feed off, no satisfaction of pride, just the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. And that was the part that unsettled them the most. Briggs broke the moment with a laugh that sounded too sharp, as though he were trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "Not bad for a custodian," he said, his grin stretched thin. "But let's not get carried away. Stripping a rifle in the dark doesn't make you a shooter. Any of these boys could do the same." The younger men nodded, eager for relief, for a narrative that restored their sense of superiority. One muttered something about YouTube tutorials, and another joked about how I probably memorized steps from a manual. Their words were flimsy shields against the truth, and they knew it. Reynolds did not laugh. He stood with his arms crossed, his gaze steady on me. When I looked back, I saw a flicker of something that unsettled me more than Briggs' mockery: recognition. The kind a man carries when he sees a skill he knows too well. He gave the slightest nod. So small it could have been missed, then turned away. I walked out of the storeroom with my head high, but inside my chest ached with the familiar pressure of walls closing in. Secrets are like loaded weapons. You can lock them away, hide them from sight, but eventually someone notices the weight pressing on the door. Over the next days, the air around me shifted. The whispers followed me into the mess hall, onto the walkways, through the narrow corridors of the base. Laughter lingered, but it had changed its tone, less sure, more questioning. Briggs fueled it, of course. He teased every chance he had, his words coated in sarcasm but sharpened with suspicion. You polished those rifles like a pro. Ward must be nice reading all those manuals. He winked and the men chuckled, yet behind his eyes I saw the frustration building. He wanted certainty. He wanted to strip away the veil and prove what he already feared, that I was not the harmless shadow he painted me to be. It was Reynolds who cornered me one evening outside the Armory. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gold. He stepped into my path with the quiet confidence of a man who had earned the right to speak. "You're no novice," he said, his voice low. "That kind of precision doesn't come from books, it comes from experience, from nights when failure means death." His eyes held mine, searching. "Where did you learn?" I kept my face still, the mask I had worn for years. "I did my job," I said, "same as anyone else." But he shook his head, a slow movement filled with certainty. "Not the same. I've trained hundreds. I know the difference between someone who's read about war and someone who's lived it. You've lived it." I walked past him without answering. Denial was safer than confession, yet his words echoed long after he was gone. He had seen too much. He would not let it rest. Briggs, meanwhile, was growing impatient. His pride demanded a spectacle. It was not enough to suspect. He wanted to expose me, to put me on display, to force the truth out where everyone could see. He found his moment a week later in front of half the base. We were gathered for weapons checks, the air heavy with the metallic scent of oil and cordite. Briggs raised his voice above the clatter, his tone carrying the weight of command. "Ward," he barked, "you impressed us with your little magic trick in the dark. Let's see what you can do with live steel." The room stilled. All eyes turned to me. My pulse pounded, heat rising in my chest. He was dragging me into the open, cornering me where refusal would mean surrender and acceptance would mean exposure. I met his stare, unflinching. "I told you, I do my job." He smirked, sensing the trap tightening. "Then do it on the range. Show us you can actually fire a weapon, not just clean it, unless you'd rather keep polishing while the real soldiers train." His words dripped poison, calculated to sting, to force me into a choice I did not want to make. The younger men jeered, their voices rising like a tide. "Come on, let's see it. Afraid you'll miss the target. Afraid you'll prove you're just a janitor after all." Their laughter cut through the air, sharp and cruel. I could feel Reynolds watching me, silent, waiting. There was no malice in his gaze, only curiosity laced with respect. He knew, maybe he always had, and now he was waiting to see what I would do. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms. My mind raced back to the desert, to the night I had earned a name I never wanted. The weight of the rifle in my hands, the silence before the shot, the lives saved and the lives lost. My body remembered, even if my heart tried to forget. "I don't need to prove anything," I said, my voice steady. But the truth was already leaking into the room, carried on the silence that followed. They would not let it go. Briggs would not let it go, and part of me, buried deep, no longer wanted to hide, because hiding meant carrying the ghosts alone. And maybe it was time they were seen. That night, lying in my bunk, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the hum of the bass settling into sleep. I thought of the fallen, of the ones who had called me Valkyrie with awe in their voices. I thought of the promises I had made to never speak of it again, to let the record stay buried. But promises made in silence are fragile. They crack under the weight of memory. The test in the dark had been the first crack. Briggs was hammering at it now. Relentless, and soon the wall would fall. You might think it was arrogance that drove him, or cruelty. Maybe both, but for me it was fate pressing in, forcing me to face what I had long avoided. The range awaited, the rifle awaited, and so did the truth I had spent years burying. When the time came, when the shot echoed across the base and stripped away the last of my silence, there would be no going back. If you are listening, know this: pride may set the stage, but truth writes the ending. And the ending was already waiting for me on that line of fire. The questions began quietly at first, like whispers bleeding through cracks in a wall. Men who had once ignored me now found reasons to linger by the racks, tossing casual remarks that were anything but casual. They wanted to know where I had learned the things I should not have known, how a woman meant to polish steel could dismantle it blindfolded and put it back together, as if she had been born with the pieces in her hands. I had learned long ago that silence was a weapon sharper than any blade, so I gave them nothing. A half smile, a shrug, a vague word about reading manuals. But the more I denied them, the more their curiosity grew. Curiosity is hunger, and hunger never fades until it is fed. It was Briggs who pushed hardest. He had always been the loudest, the most eager to stamp his presence on the room, but now there was a different edge to him. His pride had been nicked. And pride in men like him is a dangerous wound. He prowled around me, asking questions that came like bullets fired in quick succession. Where had I served? Who had trained me? Why my hands moved like someone who had lived under fire. One evening, when the storeroom was nearly empty and the shadows stretched long across the floor, he cornered me by the racks. "You've been lying," he said, his voice low but hard. "You don't pick up skills like that in a supply closet. So tell me, who are you really?" My throat tightened, memory clawing at the edges of my composure. The truth surged like a wave begging to break, but I forced it back. To tell him would be to open a door that could never be closed. "I had a teacher once," I said finally, my words slow, deliberate. "He taught me things I never asked for, and he's not here to answer your questions. He's buried in Kandahar." The name hung between us like a ghost for a moment. Even Briggs' bravado faltered. He searched my face, looking for cracks for a tell. But I held steady, my eyes locked on his, my silence deeper than his suspicion. Kandahar, the word was enough to feed them for days. I heard it whispered in the mess hall, felt it echo down corridors. The place carried its own ghosts, its own legends. Men had gone there and never returned. Others had come back with eyes that never looked the same. To claim connection to it was to claim scars unseen. But Briggs did not hear reverence in my words. He heard threat. And threat, in his mind, meant danger. He began to frame me not as curiosity, but as risk, a shadow that did not fit neatly into the order he knew. "She's a security hazard," I overheard him say one night, his voice carrying through the thin walls of the barracks. "Nobody knows her record. Nobody knows who she really is. We're letting a stranger play with our weapons, and we're fools if we think that's safe." His men murmured agreement, their fear feeding off his. Fear is contagious, and Briggs spread it well. The only one who did not join the chorus was Reynolds. He had been watching in silence, weighing more than words. His eyes carried the weight of experience, the kind that strips away bravado and leaves only truth. And it was Reynolds who finally stepped forward when the tension had grown too thick to ignore. It was late afternoon, the sun burning low and fierce across the base. We were gathered outside, Briggs pressing his case with the commanding officer, his voice sharp with accusation. I stood off to the side, letting the storm build without protest. I had learned long ago that words only dig deeper holes when men have already decided what to believe. Reynolds cut through the noise with calm authority. "If you doubt her, give her a test worthy of that doubt, not stripping parts in the dark, not a parlor trick, a real test, something that cannot be faked." His gaze flicked to me steady, unblinking. "Put her on the range, long distance. Let the rifle speak the truth." The crowd stilled, even Briggs faltered for a moment. A long-distance test was no small thing. It demanded more than memory or bravado. It demanded precision, calculation, calm under pressure. It demanded the soul of a marksman. Briggs' lips curled into a grin, slow and predatory. "Fine," he said. "We'll give her the range. Let's see how far the legend really goes." The men chuckled nervously, some eager, some uneasy. They wanted a show, a spectacle, a chance to watch me stumble and fall. They did not know they were asking to open a door they could never close. That night I lay awake in my bunk, staring at the ceiling while the ocean whispered beyond the walls. My mind drifted to Kandahar, to the dust and the fire, to the face of the man I had called teacher. He had taught me to breathe through chaos, to see through distance, to make the impossible seem simple. And he had died there. His body left in the soil of a country that swallowed so many. I whispered his name into the dark, a prayer, a memory. I had carried his lessons like a hidden scar, never meant to be seen again. And now, because pride and suspicion demanded it, I was being forced to pull those scars into the light. If you are listening, know this. Some truths are not chosen. They are dragged into daylight by the hands of others, and all you can do is stand in their glare. The range awaited, and with it, the past I had fought so hard to bury. The decision spread across the base like wildfire. By morning, everyone seemed to know. I caught fragments of conversation in the mess hall, whispers trailing off when I entered, laughter that masked unease. Some were eager for spectacle. Others carried a wary silence, the kind that follows rumors too sharp to ignore. I had been invisible for so long that to suddenly be the center of attention felt like walking under a spotlight. Every eye, every breath. Every muttered word seemed to press against me, demanding answers I had sworn never to give. Briggs thrived on the attention. He strutted through the corridors with the smugness of a man who believed he had already won. To him, this was not a test of skill but a performance, a chance to prove that I was smoke and mirrors, nothing more. He told his men as much, his voice loud enough to carry. Watch, she'll fold. Strip a rifle in the dark is one thing, putting steel on target is another. She's nothing but a ghost story waiting to be laughed off. And yet, beneath his swagger, I saw the edge of something else. Fear, because if I didn't fold, if I met the challenge and exceeded it, his authority would fracture in front of the men he led. For Briggs, this was personal. Pride had demanded the stage. Now pride demanded victory, no matter the cost. Reynolds remained quiet. He didn't need to boast or sneer. He simply watched me with that steady gaze, as if measuring something only he could see. When we crossed paths outside the armory, he stopped me with a single word. Tomorrow. I nodded. There was nothing else to say. That night sleep never came. I lay in my bunk, the hum of the bass replaced by the hum of memory. Kandahar rose in my mind, vivid and merciless. The desert heat pressing down, the smell of gun oil and blood mixing in the air, the voice of my teacher steady in my ear. Breathe. Don't chase the shot. Let it come to you. A rifle doesn't lie. It only tells the truth of the hands that hold it. His voice echoed long after he was gone, long after the soil of Afghanistan had claimed him. I had sworn never to pick up a rifle again, to carry his lessons as memory, not action. But oaths are fragile things when tested by pride and suspicion, and tomorrow that fragility would shatter. The morning broke sharp and cold, the sky washed in steel gray. I dressed in silence. The motions automatic, my body moving while my mind sank into stillness. Outside, men gathered, their voices a low murmur of anticipation. The range was alive with the smell of earth and cordite, targets lined in the distance like silent witnesses. Briggs stood at the center, grinning, the M2010 enhanced sniper rifle gleaming in his hands. He held it out to me like a challenge, his eyes bright with the cruel joy of a predator cornering prey. Here you go, Ward. Let's see what you can do with a real rifle. I took it without hesitation. The weight settled against my shoulder, heavy, familiar, inevitable. My fingers traced the contours, the cold steel warm with memory. The chatter around me faded until there was only the rifle, the target, and the thrum of my heartbeat in my ears. The men formed a semicircle behind us, their voices hushed now. Anticipation hummed in the air, thick as fog. Some wanted me to fail. Others wanted to see if the whispers were true. All of them leaned forward, eyes fixed, waiting for the moment truth would break open. Reynolds stepped forward, his voice calm, authoritative. 1,000 meters, winds light 5 knots out of the west, target set, take your time. His words were not mocking, not taunting. They were the words of a man who respected the rifle, who respected the test. Briggs snorted. She doesn't need your help, Chief. Let's see if she can even hit the damn thing. I lay prone, settling the rifle against my shoulder, the scope rising to meet my eye. The world narrowed to crosshairs and distance. My breath slowed, steady, controlled. For a moment, the bass disappeared. The jeers, the whispers, the weight of their eyes gone. There was only me, the rifle, and the ghost of a voice that still lived in memory. Breathe, don't force it. The shot comes when it's ready. The crosshairs danced, then steadied. My finger rested against the trigger, light, patient. I squeezed. The crack split the air, sharp and final. The recoil thudded into my shoulder, familiar, welcome. Through the scope, I saw the target shudder, the shot clean, true, dead center. Gasps rippled behind me. Disbelief, awe, a sudden silence that spoke louder than any cheer. Briggs' grin faltered, his jaw tightening. He forced a laugh, brittle. Beginner's luck, he said, but the words carried no weight. Reynolds said nothing. He only nodded, the smallest gesture, as though confirming something he had already known. I lowered the rifle, my hand steady. I did not smile, did not gloat. I simply set the weapon down and rose, my gaze sweeping over the men who had mocked and doubted. Their eyes no longer carried laughter. They carried questions, fear, and something else, respect, reluctant and raw. But the test was not over. Briggs could not let it end there. His pride demanded more, demanded proof beyond denial. He stepped forward, his voice sharp. One shot means nothing. Anyone can get lucky. Let's see you do it again and again. Different ranges. Different wind, prove it wasn't a fluke. The men murmured, torn between disbelief and the desire for spectacle. Reynolds spoke, his tone calm but firm. Enough, she proved what needed proving. But Briggs shook his head, his grin twisting. Not enough for me. I met his gaze, steady, unflinching. Then set the targets, I said, my voice carried across the range, calm and certain. As far as you want, I'll hit them. A hush fell, heavy as the weight of history. They didn't know it yet, but this was the moment the shadow they had mocked would begin to take shape as something else entirely. Not a custodian, not a curiosity, something more, something they had whispered of without knowing. The Valkyrie was stirring, and once she rose, there would be no putting her back to sleep. The range was a stage, and I had been dragged into the center of it. The earth smelled of dust and oil, the air heavy with anticipation. Men crowded behind me, their whispers sharp as the wind cutting across the open field. Some leaned forward with hungry eyes, eager for the fall. Others stood in tense silence, unsure whether they were about to witness humiliation or something they would tell stories about for years. Briggs stood near the shooting bench, grinning like a man who had already won. He set the M2010 ESR down in front of me, the black steel gleaming beneath the pale light. His voice carried over the crowd, pitched for effect. 5 shots, 1,000 meters. Hit the bullseye and maybe we'll start believing your little ghost stories. The rifle was not unfamiliar. I had cleaned it, oiled it, cataloged it, my hands tracing its lines countless times. But holding it now in front of so many eyes was different. It was not a tool but a burden, a key that could open the door to everything I had fought to bury. I lowered myself onto the mat, feeling the rough ground press against my chest. The rifle settled into my hands, weighty, inevitable. Through the scope, the target waited, distant and small, a pale square against the horizon. The world narrowed to a tunnel of breath and steel. Behind me, the chatter hushed. Even Briggs fell silent, though I could feel his smirk like a blade at my... Only Reynolds' voice broke the stillness, calm and sure. Winds shifting east, at just half a mil. His tone was not mocking, not commanding. It was the voice of a man who had seen too much to waste words. I steadied my breath. Inhale, hold, exhale, slow. My finger brushed the trigger, light as a whisper. I squeezed. The crack split the air, recoil slamming into my shoulder. A second later, the spotter's call rang out from the far end. Bullseye. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. No one spoke, but the silence screamed louder than words. I chambered the second round. My body moved without thought, muscle memory, carved from nights in places no one wanted to remember. Another breath, another squeeze, another crack. The target quivered, another bullseye. By the third shot, their silence had changed. It was no longer doubt, but awe. Men who had laughed at me days earlier now leaned in, eyes wide, breaths caught. They had seen skill before, but this was something else. Something that reached beyond training into the realm of myth. The fourth shot struck true again, carving a perfect line of precision across the heart of the target. 4 for 4, a pattern that left no room for chance. Briggs' grin faltered. He forced a laugh, brittle, lucky streak. Anyone can get hot for a minute. His words fell flat, swallowed by the weight of what they had seen. I could have stopped there. 4 perfect shots at 1,000 meters was more than enough to silence doubt, but something inside me refused to leave it unfinished. I lifted my head, meeting Briggs' gaze. One more, I said quietly. No scope. A murmur swept the crowd. They shifted, uneasy, curious, caught between disbelief and hunger. Briggs barked a laugh, too loud, too forced. Iron sights at 1,000 meters, you'll miss the paper entirely. I slid the scope free, setting it aside. The rifle felt naked in my hands, stripped of precision's crutch. I settled again, the horizon blurred but steady in my sight line. Breath slowed, my heartbeat aligning with the silence. I could almost hear my teacher's voice, calm and firm, carried from another life. Trust your body, trust your breath. The shot is not in the sight, but in the soul. I squeezed the trigger, the rifle roared, the target shuddered. The spotter's voice cracked with disbelief. 10 ring, clean. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then silence fell, so heavy it felt like the earth itself held its breath. 4 perfect bullseyes with a scope. 1 clean strike with iron sights, a feat so absurd it bordered on legend. I rose slowly, setting the rifle down with care. My hands were steady, my face calm. Inside, though, something shifted. A wall I had built stone by stone for years had cracked wide open. Reynolds stepped forward, his voice low but carrying. That's not the skill of a technician, that's the skill of a legend. His eyes held mine, steady, certain. I've seen shooters all my life. No one does that without a name written in the history books. The crowd stirred, restless, murmuring. Briggs pushed forward, his face red, his voice sharp with anger and fear. Who the hell are you? Nobody does that. Nobody. Where did you learn? Who trained you? I met his fury with stillness. My voice came soft, but it cut through the noise like steel. There are names you'll never read in any book. Men and women who carried battles on their shoulders but were buried without recognition. My teacher was one of them. Me, I paused, letting the silence stretch until every ear leaned forward. They called me the Valkyrie. The name dropped into the air like thunder rolling across the range. Some gasped, some muttered, some stared in stunned silence. Briggs' face hardened, his pride wounded deeper than words could cover. Reynolds' eyes softened with something else, recognition, respect, and maybe sorrow. The Valkyrie, a name I had sworn never to speak again, a name carved out of fire and sacrifice. Now spoken aloud, it could never be taken back. If you are still listening, understand this. Names carry weight. They are not just labels, but truths forged in blood and memory. And once spoken, they cannot be buried again. The name hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. I could see it in their faces, the flicker of recognition, the ripple of disbelief, the dawning realization that the woman they had mocked in the storeroom carried a past they could not begin to imagine. Whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Some said nothing at all, their silence louder than any words. Briggs was the first to speak. His voice cracked with the force of his anger, his pride struggling to contain the truth. The Valkyrie. That's just a campfire story. A ghost told to make rookies feel small. You're nothing but a fraud, ward, a pretender who got lucky. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, trying to pull the ground back under his boots, but the words didn't land, not after what they had just seen. 5 shots, 5 truths written in steel and distance. No one could dismiss that. Reynolds stepped forward slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. I served with men who whispered that name in the desert, he said quietly, but his voice carried. They said she saw through shadows, that she could steady her breath when no one else could, that she made shots no one believed until they walked up and touched the holes themselves. He let the weight of his words fall. That wasn't luck, that was you. The crowd shifted, torn between awe and unease. Some looked at me with respect, raw and sudden. Others glanced away, unwilling to face what it meant to stand in the presence of someone they had once mocked. I wished I could take it back. Wished I had swallowed the name, locked it away again, because names like that don't belong to the living. They belong to the ghosts we carry, to the men who never came home. To speak it was to betray them, to drag their memory into the light where pride and curiosity gnawed at it. Briggs wouldn't let it go. He stalked closer, his eyes wild with the need to tear me down. You expect us to believe that you, some nobody mopping rifle grease, are the same woman they whisper about. Prove it. Tell us where, tell us when, tell us who you killed. His voice rose, sharp and demanding. Or admit you're a liar. The old me, the woman who had lived in the sand and smoke, would have answered with silence or steel, but I was not her anymore. I had sworn to leave her buried, so I met his rage with calm. Some truths don't belong to you, I said softly, and some names carry more dead than you'd care to count. You want stories, I carry graves. For a moment, even Briggs faltered. His mouth opened, but the words didn't come, because buried somewhere beneath his pride, he knew. War leaves marks you can't fake, and what they had seen on that range was a scar written plain as daylight. The men began to drift away, uneasy, shaken. They had come for spectacle, but they left with silence, each of them carrying the weight of what they had witnessed. The Valkyrie was no longer a shadowed rumor. She was flesh and blood standing among them. Reynolds lingered. He waited until the others were gone before he spoke, his voice low. I don't know what you've carried, Ward, but I know the look of someone who's lived too long in the dark. I won't press you. Just know this, you're not as alone as you think. For a moment, I almost believed him, almost let myself feel the relief of being seen without judgment. But the truth is heavier than comfort. I shook my head, my voice breaking softer than I meant it to. You can't know what it costs to wear a name like that. He didn't argue. He just nodded once and walked away, leaving me with the ghosts. That night, the base was restless. I heard my name whispered down hallways, felt eyes following me in the mess hall. Not Alina Ward, not the girl who polished rifles. The Valkyrie, a name I had not asked for, now strapped back onto my shoulders like armor I thought I had shed. I sat alone in my quarters, the hum of the ocean seeping through the walls, and thought about what it had cost to earn that name. The sleepless nights, the faces of men I could not save, the sound of my own breath steadying against the chaos as I pulled the trigger again and again, knowing that every shot bought time for someone else and took away time from someone's son, someone's father. They call it glory, they call it legend, but it is nothing more than the weight of blood you can never wash away. Briggs wouldn't stop. I knew it even before the next morning came. For him, my name was not revelation, but challenge. His pride could not survive in the shadow of a woman who had outshot him, outlasted him, and carried a name larger than his own. He would dig, he would press, he would tear until he found something to shatter me. And maybe that was the part that terrified me most. Not Briggs' anger, not the stares of the men, but the fear that once the wall crumbled, once the Valkyrie fully stepped back into the light, I would lose myself to her again. That I would no longer be Alina Ward, the quiet woman who scrubbed oil from steel, but only the shadow of the myth they wanted me to be. Because war never truly ends. It just waits, patient and silent, inside the ones who survived. And when it rises again, it devours everything you thought you had left. If you're still with me, listening, remember this. Heroes are not born from victory. They are carved from loss. And every legend you hear whispered in the dark carries a cost too heavy to speak aloud. The Valkyrie had been spoken into existence again, and now, no matter how much I longed for silence, there would be no hiding her. The whispers didn't die after the range, they grew. My name traveled through the base like a storm cloud rolling low over the ocean. Men who had never spoken to me now watched me with a strange mixture of fear and awe. The Valkyrie, they murmured, the ghost from the desert, the shadow no one believed was real. I hated it. Every time I heard the name, the weight of it pressed deeper into my chest, pulling me back to a night I had buried under silence. Briggs wouldn't let go. If anything, the revelation only sharpened his obsession. He prowled the base with questions, cornering anyone who might know me, combing through scraps of records he could access. But my past was sealed, locked behind walls of secrecy. That only made him more dangerous, because pride mixed with ignorance is the kind of fire that burns everything in its path. It was Reynolds who finally confronted me directly. It happened late at night, the armory dim and quiet. I had stayed behind, hands busy with a rifle I wasn't cleaning so much as holding, steadying myself with its weight. He stepped inside without a word, stood in the doorway for a long moment before breaking the silence. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle, "but I need you to hear this. Briggs is stirring up hell. The more you stay silent, the more dangerous it gets. Men will believe anything in the absence of truth." I set the rifle down, my hands trembling despite myself. For years I had kept my story locked tight, believing silence was protection. But silence had turned into a cage, and now, with Briggs tearing at the bars, maybe it was time to speak. "I was part of Orion," I said finally. The words came out low, almost foreign. Reynolds' eyes flickered, a small recognition, the kind that comes only from men who know what black programs leave behind. Top secret. I continued, my voice catching on the edges of memory. Off the books, no names, no records. We were shadows, ghosts sent where others couldn't go. My designation was simple, sniper. Reynolds didn't interrupt. He just listened, the weight of his silence steady, anchoring me as I dug into the past. My longest confirmed shot was 3,142 meters. That's what they whispered about, the shot across the valley at dawn. But what no one talks about is what came after. We were betrayed, our coordinates leaked. They came for us before sunrise, heavy and merciless. My throat tightened. I watched my entire unit fall. One by one, brothers, sisters, my family. I crawled out alive, but I left pieces of myself in that sand that will never come back. The armory felt too small for the ghosts pressing in. I clenched my fists, forcing my breath steady. When I came home, I didn't come home. My name was erased. No medals, no record, just silence. They buried Orion as if it had never existed, and me along with it. All I had left was the shadow of a name the survivors whispered, the Valkyrie. Reynolds exhaled slowly, his jaw tight. His eyes were not filled with disbelief or pity. They carried something else, respect, understanding, and sorrow. "Now you know," I said, my voice breaking softer than I meant it to. "That's the truth Briggs wants so badly, a truth no one should ever want. I didn't survive because I was stronger. I survived because fate picked me and left the others behind. And I've been paying for it every day since." For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Then Reynolds spoke, his voice low but certain. War doesn't end when the guns fall silent. It lives on in the chests of those who still breathe. I've seen it in myself. I see it in you. The cost isn't just in the blood spilled. It's in the weight carried long after the battle is done. His words cut deep because they were true. The war had never ended for me. It lived inside my ribcage. In every breath I took, in every dream that woke me sweating, I nodded, unable to trust my voice. If Briggs keeps pushing, Reynolds added, remember this, you don't owe him your pain. He wants spectacle. But pain isn't a show, it's survival. Don't let him turn what you lived through into his entertainment. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as a myth, not as a name whispered in shadows, but as a soldier carrying ghosts. That night, lying in my bunk, I thought of my team, faces blurred with time, voices faded, but the feeling of them pressed close, alive in memory. I whispered their names, one by one, as if speaking them might keep them alive a little longer. The truth was out now, not to Briggs, not to the base, but to one man who would guard it with respect. It was both a relief and a new burden, because the more people who knew, the more real it became again. And I wasn't sure how much more of that reality I could carry, but one thing was clear. My silence was gone. The Valkyrie was no longer just a rumor. She was flesh and blood again, standing in the open. And the cost of that was only beginning to reveal itself. If you're listening, remember this. Legends aren't born in triumph. They're forged in betrayal, in loss, in the silence that follows when the world forgets your name. And every legend carries a graveyard in its chest. Morning broke heavy and gray, the kind of sky that pressed low and made every breath taste of steel. Word had spread further overnight. By the time I walked into the mess hall, heads turned in a quiet wave, conversations halting mid-sentence. They didn't see Alina Ward anymore. They saw the rumor made flesh, the whispered sniper, the ghost they had once laughed at in the storeroom. And at the center of it stood Briggs. He had been waiting, arms crossed, jaw clenched, eyes gleaming with the kind of anger that only pride wounded too deep can summon. The moment our eyes met, he pushed off the wall and closed the space between us. So it's true, he spat, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. You've been hiding behind a mop while the rest of us bleed, pretending to be nothing when you've got blood on your hands deeper than all of us combined. What kind of soldier does that make you? I felt the eyes of every man and woman around us lock on me. The silence cut sharper than any blade. I didn't pretend, I answered, my voice steady but low. I buried it because that was the only way I could keep breathing. You think a name like mine is an honor, it's a weight, a chain. Briggs barked a laugh, harsh and brittle. A chain, you had the chance to be remembered and you threw it away to hide like a coward. Men died out there, Ward. Don't you dare dishonor them by crawling into the shadows while the rest of us stood tall. Something in me cracked then, not because of his words, but because for a sliver of a second, I remembered standing tall, my rifle in my hands, my team at my side, the morning light bleeding over Kandahar, and then in the space of a heartbeat, all of it gone. The smell of dust mixed with blood, the silence after the last scream. You don't get to speak their names, I said, sharper now. Weren't there? You didn't watch them die because someone fed us to the wolves. You didn't carry their silence home with you. I did, and I live with it every day. The room had gone so still that even the hum of the lights seemed loud. Reynolds stepped forward then, breaking the standoff before it could become something worse. That's enough, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. His eyes cut into Briggs like cold iron. You don't know the first thing about carrying ghosts. Until you do, you don't get to judge how someone survives them. Briggs glared, but he didn't push past Reynolds, not then. But I saw the promise in his eyes. This wasn't over. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over. Coward, hiding, dishonor. They crawled inside me like parasites, gnawing at the edges of a truth I had long feared, that maybe he was right. Maybe silence was cowardice. Maybe my refusal to stand in the light was a betrayal of the ones who never came home. I remembered their faces again, clearer now than they had been in years. Ramirez always smiling even in the worst of it. Keegan, who swore he'd open a bar when it was all over. Jensen, quiet, steady, the brother I never had, all gone in a single dawn, and me left breathing, left to carry their weight alone. I rolled over, pressed my fists into my eyes, and wished, just for a moment, that I had fallen with them, that I hadn't been cursed to survive. Survival is not always mercy. Sometimes it is punishment. The following day, Briggs struck again, this time in the open, with witnesses chosen carefully. He cornered me on the range, his voice sharp with venom. You think you're untouchable because you made one long shot. Records mean nothing without a witness. Maybe you're just a myth who believed her own story. Maybe you didn't save anyone. Maybe you just left your team to die while you ran. It was a blade to the gut because he had touched the rawest wound. The night I crawled away, my body broken and my soul fractured, I had asked myself the same thing. Had I abandoned them by surviving? Did I deserve their sacrifice? That question had haunted every step of my years since. I didn't answer him. I couldn't, but Reynolds did. He stepped between us again, his presence heavy and certain. That's enough, Briggs. You're not proving anything but your own weakness. A man who needs to break others to feel tall is already standing on broken legs. Briggs sneered. But I could see the cracks forming. His hatred wasn't about me anymore. It was about his pride bleeding under the weight of a truth he couldn't accept, that a woman he had mocked, dismissed, and underestimated carried a legacy greater than his own. After he left, Reynolds turned to me. His voice was softer now, almost kind. You don't need to answer him. You don't need to answer anyone. What you've lived is already carved into you. Nothing he says can change that. I nodded, though the storm inside me raged louder than ever. That evening, I found myself standing alone at the edge of the ocean, the waves breaking hard against the shore. The air smelled of salt and rust, and I thought about the night in Kandahar again, about the betrayal, the loss, the way survival felt like theft. I whispered their names again, letting the wind carry them. Ramirez, Keegan, Jensen, and the others whose faces blurred but whose absence still clawed at me. You were the lucky one, Briggs had said once, mocking. But luck was not the word. Luck does not leave you hollow. Luck does not leave you waking in the night, heart pounding, hand reaching for a rifle that isn't there. Luck does not carve out your chest and fill it with silence. No, survival is not luck, it is debt, and I will carry that debt until my last breath. The base moved on as bases always do. Rumors quieted, interest shifted, but Briggs' hatred smoldered, and my ghosts pressed closer than ever. Reynolds' words stayed with me, though, echoing in the quiet spaces. War doesn't end when the guns fall silent. It lives in the chests of those who still breathe. I thought about that as the days slipped by, about how maybe he was right. Maybe survival was not cowardice, but proof that we carried for the ones who could not, proof that we lived, not to forget, but to remember. If you're hearing this now, take it with you. Survival is not always glory. It is not clean. It is not easy. It is raw and ugly and heavy, but it is also the last gift we can give to the ones who are gone, to keep their names alive, to carry their stories forward. That is the truth. That is the price. And I will carry it no matter how much it breaks me. When I left the base, I did not leave as the Valkyrie. I walked out as Alina Ward, a woman carrying silence, carrying ghosts, carrying the weight of names no one else would ever speak aloud. The whispers followed me, but so did the quiet respect etched into the eyes of those who had seen what they could not explain. I never asked to be a legend. I only asked to survive. The truth is simple. You should never judge a life by the surface you see. A janitor polishing steel might be the same hands that once pulled a trigger 3 kilometers away to save lives you will never know. A quiet woman in the corner might be the one who stood in the fire when others fell. Heroes do not always wear the banners you expect. Often they wear scars hidden under sleeves, memories locked deep where no one can touch them. We can take the soldier out of war, but war never leaves the soldier. It lives in the hollow spaces between breaths, in the dreams that wake us sweating, in the silence we carry when no one else can understand. And many victories, many sacrifices remain buried beneath the weight of systems that choose silence over recognition. But that does not make them less real. It only makes them harder to remember. I will carry my ghosts. I will honor my dead. And if nothing else, I hope my story reminds you to look closer at the quiet ones, the ones the world overlooks. Because sometimes the truest courage is hidden in plain sight. If this story touched your heart, share it, subscribe, and keep these hidden heroes alive in our memories.